The warning siren screamed as Elden Halil wrestled with the failing controls of his research shuttle. The vessel plunged through the violet-tinted clouds of Amaro, a lush alien world known for its dangerous, uncharted jungles. The crimson glow of the cockpit's alarms painted him in stark relief as the ship's AI reported the grim reality. Critical engine failure imminent. Clearing detected 2 kilometers ahead. Survival probability, 37%. Elden smirked. Better odds than last week's dating disaster. He yanked the controls, guiding the shuttle toward the tiny gap in the canopy ahead. The trees loomed closer, skyscraper-sized trunks adorned with glowing vines, as the ship screamed through the atmosphere. Branches scraped against the hull with deafening shrieks before the shuttle slammed into the ground. When Elden regained consciousness, the acrid smell of burnt circuits mingled with the earthy tang of alien soil. His ribs ached as he pushed himself upright, surveying the dense, bioluminescent jungle around him. Unfamiliar flora pulsed with light, while massive carnivorous flowers snapped at oversized insects. The sound of movement drew his attention. Grabbing a sample tool, a poor substitute for a weapon, he stepped outside. "Hello? I'm an Earth scientist. My ship." A spear slammed into the shuttle's hull inches from his head. He froze as a group of blue-skinned humanoids emerged from the underbrush. Their tall, athletic forms moved with predatory grace, and their minimal armor revealed the rippling musculature beneath. The leader stepped forward, her braided white hair adorned with feathers and bones. She pointed a weapon at him, her tone sharp. "You will come with us. Queen Altria will decide your fate." Elden's captors marched him through the jungle, his scientist brain cataloging every detail. The women navigated expertly, using the glowing flora as markers and avoiding dangerous plants. He noted the efficiency of their movements and how their weapons blended primitive design with surprising lethality. The village they led him to was suspended high in the trees, a network of platforms and walkways interwoven with the living wood of the jungle. The architecture was a seamless blend of organic and precise, leaving him both awed and concerned. At the center of the largest platform sat Queen Altria, her midnight blue skin gleaming under the filtered sunlight. Her throne seemed to grow directly from the tree itself, and her eyes were sharp and assessing as they locked onto him. "This," she said, her voice regal and commanding, "is what crashes into my jungle? A scrawny human, unarmed and unremarkable." Scrawny? Elden feigned offense, smirking despite the danger. "You wound me, Your Majesty. I prefer lean and resourceful." Altria's lips twitched, but her gaze hardened. "Your tongue will not save you, Earthling. Perhaps your screams will." She ordered him imprisoned, promising to demonstrate his weakness to her people the following day. As they dragged him away, Elden called over his shoulder, "You seem very confident, but I've found that arrogance rarely wins in the long run." The holding pen was a cage of living wood, its bars shifting as though alive. Elden watched the village's evening bustle from his elevated perch, noting the cultural complexity around him. Despite his precarious situation, curiosity burned brighter than fear. A shadow approached, and he didn't need to look to know who it was. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone light. "Come to gloat." Queen Altria stood before the cage, her expression inscrutable. "Why do you not cower, Earthling? Do you not fear what awaits you tomorrow?" Elden met her gaze through the bars. "Fear's a waste of energy. Besides, I've found you fascinating. Strong, intelligent, a born leader. What's not to admire?" Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer, towering over him even through the bars. "You amuse yourself with words. Tomorrow, we'll see how long your wit lasts." Elden leaned against the bars, his smirk unwavering. "You keep saying that, but here you are, late at night, alone, talking to me. Why is that, I wonder?" Her hand shot through the bars, grabbing his shirt and yanking him forward. "You think you have power here, little man?" she growled. "No," he said softly, "but I think I'm getting under your skin." For a moment, their faces were inches apart, tension crackling like static. Then she released him with a frustrated growl. "Sleep while you can," she spat, stalking off. Elden chuckled, settling back down. Sweet dreams, Your Majesty. The next morning, Elden was hauled to a central platform surrounded by a crowd of warriors. Queen Altria, resplendent in ceremonial armor, stood before him. Your first challenge, she announced, is the combat ring. 3 of my best warriors will face you. Survive, and I might reconsider feeding you to the beasts. Elden stepped forward, shedding his jacket to reveal a surprisingly toned physique. Altria's eyes flicked over him briefly, a reaction she quickly masked. Is this a trial by strength or wit? He asked. Because I don't see a library nearby. Altria smirked, though her tone was cutting. Strength. Let us see how Earth measures up. The crowd roared as the warriors stepped forward, their movements fluid and deadly. Elden squared his shoulders, his mind racing. Guess it's time to impress the queen, he muttered under his breath. Over the next series of events, Elden's wit and resourcefulness shone. Whether outmaneuvering his opponents in the combat ring or charming the queen's court with his intellect, he proved more formidable than Altria had anticipated. By the time the day ended, the queen was no longer certain if she wanted to break him or keep him. And that was what scared her most. Dusk settled over the jungle village, the fiery hues of the setting sun streaking through the canopy as bioluminescent plants began to glow faintly. Elden sat on the floor of his holding cage, muscles aching from his earlier trials. His mind was a blur of strategies and observations. He hadn't just survived the day's challenges, he'd excelled. The combat ring had been brutal, but he'd used the environment to outthink his opponents, narrowly avoiding their lethal strikes while turning their aggression against them. The murmurs of the warriors afterward had been impossible to miss. Now, the soft thud of approaching footsteps broke his concentration. He looked up to see Queen Altria standing before his cage again, her expression unreadable. Tonight, she wore no ceremonial armor, only a sleek, form-fitting tunic made of woven vines and leather, emphasizing her lithe, powerful form. Her hair, typically pristine, was slightly tousled, as if she had been pacing or wrestling with her own thoughts. You performed better than expected, she said, her voice clipped. Elden smiled, standing slowly and stretching, the bars of the cage casting shadows across his figure. Is that a compliment I hear? Careful, Your Majesty. I might start thinking you like me. Altria's jaw tightened. You mistake my acknowledgement for approval. Your survival today only ensures you face greater challenges tomorrow. Ah, raising the stakes. Classic leadership move, he said, leaning casually against the bars. But if I didn't know better, I'd think you're worried I'll keep winning. Her eyes flashed with irritation, and she stepped closer to the cage. Do not mistake my curiosity for weakness, human. You are an anomaly, a curiosity to be studied and crushed. Elden tilted his head, meeting her gaze with a calm that seemed to unnerve her. You keep telling yourself that, but I think we both know this little game isn't just about me proving myself. You're testing something else? Aren't you? Maybe your own assumptions? Altria's hand shot out, gripping the bars. Her strength made the wood groan, but she didn't speak immediately. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of jungle life. Then, her voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. You speak as if you understand me, as if you can see through my people, my rule, my strength. Her eyes bore into his. But tell me, Elden Halil, why should I not end this now? Break you in front of my people and move on with my reign? Elden took a step closer, so their faces were inches apart, separated only by the living bars. His voice was equally soft, but his tone held a note of challenge. Because if you could, you already would have. Her breath caught, barely, but Elden noticed. His smirk deepened, and he leaned back, breaking the charged moment. Look, I get it. You've ruled through strength, through being the smartest and most dangerous person in the room. And now here I am, the wild card. I don't fit the pattern, and that's frustrating. But I think you're starting to see that maybe that's not a bad thing. Altria's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned abruptly, pacing away before stopping and looking over her shoulder. You think this is a negotiation? That you can talk your way into my favor? Elden shrugged. Not really my style. I prefer to earn it. Altria's laugh was sharp, almost mocking. And how do you propose to earn the favor of a queen? Elden's grin softened into something almost sincere. By showing you there's more to strength than domination. That sometimes curiosity, adaptability, and even humor have their place. Altria turned fully, facing him again, her expression carefully neutral. You truly believe your foolish wit will win you any place among my peoples? Not my wit, me. His voice was steady now, earnest. I think I've already started proving that. She stared at him for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. Then, without another word, she strode away, her steps quick and purposeful. Morning came too soon. Elden was escorted to the central platform again, this time surrounded by a mix of warriors and onlookers who whispered as he passed. The queen stood at the far end, her regal demeanor unshaken, but her eyes sharper than ever. Today's trial, she announced, her voice carrying over the crowd, is not of strength but of will. Let us see how long this Earth scientist lasts when confronted with Amaro's most insidious dangers. Elden arched an eyebrow, stepping forward. You're not throwing me in a pit of carnivorous flowers, are you? Because I don't have my machete on me. The crowd chuckled, briefly, before silencing themselves under Altria's glare. She gestured to a platform extending beyond the main area. It jutted over a pit filled with glowing, undulating vines that seemed to pulse with life. This is the GLR spiral, she said, a plant that tests the willpower of any who touch it. Its bioluminescent tendrils release spores that induce visions, illusions crafted from your own mind. Some face nightmares, others temptations. Few emerge unscathed. Elden's confidence wavered slightly as he eyed the writhing mass. Well, he muttered, at least it's not flowers with teeth. Altria stepped closer, her tone icy. Step into the pit, Elden Halil. Show us the strength of your mind, or crumble. The crowd leaned forward, anticipation thick in the air. Elden inhaled deeply, then glanced at Altria with a half-smile. If I survive this, do I get a proper breakfast? The queen didn't answer, but her lips twitched, a flicker of amusement she quickly masked. Begin. Elden descended into the pit, the vines shifting under his weight as the spores began to swirl around him. The world tilted, the sounds of the village fading. And then, everything changed, and the games truly began. The moment Elden's boots touched the writhing mass of vines in the JLR spiral, the air seemed to change. A low hum vibrated through his body, not unlike the thrum of a starship engine, except this sound seemed alive. The bioluminescent tendrils glowed brighter, their light shifting into patterns that seemed deliberate, almost hypnotic. He blinked, and the jungle platform above him blurred and faded into darkness. Then the visions began. Elden stood in the cockpit of his shuttle. Everything was pristine, untouched, no crash, no warning sirens. Outside the viewport, Earth loomed in serene splendor. He blinked, confused. This isn't real, he muttered, gripping the controls, trying to force his mind to focus. It's the spores, an illusion. But the illusion didn't care. The shuttle systems crackled to life, and the AI's familiar voice chimed in, calm and mechanical. Incoming transmission from Earth Command. Routing now. The screen flickered, and a woman appeared. Her sharp features and piercing green eyes were unmistakable. Lena, Elden whispered, his throat tightening. His ex-fiancée's image smiled, soft and warm. Elden, you made it back. Elden's heart twisted painfully. No, you're not real. This is a trick. Her expression faltered. Elden, it's me. You've been gone for so long. I waited. He shook his head violently, turning away. Not real. None of this is real. But her voice softened, cutting through his resistance. You left for the stars, and I didn't stop you. I wanted you to chase your dreams. But I've been waiting, Elden. Waiting for you to come back. He turned back toward her, his resolve wavering. The cockpit's lighting dimmed, the illusion growing stronger. It felt so real. The smell of her favorite jasmine perfume. The way her lips curved as she spoke his name. You can come back, Elden. Leave this alien jungle behind. Be with me. We can start over. His hand hovered over the controls. It would be so easy to believe this. To escape the nightmare of Amaro. To stop fighting. The vines beneath him seemed to pulse in approval, amplifying the vision, wrapping him in its comforting deceit. Then a thought pierced the haze. This isn't Lena. This isn't my ship. This is what the Queen wants. Elden clenched his fists, forcing his mind to focus. Nice try, he said aloud, his voice trembling but firm. But Lena would never ask me to stop exploring. The image of Lena flickered, her smile twisting into something predatory, almost cruel. The cockpit dissolved into shadow, and Elden fell into a new vision. This time he was back in the jungle. But the once vibrant flora was dead, twisted into grotesque shapes. Smoke choked the air, and the cries of pain and panic echoed around him. He turned and saw them. Queen Altria's warriors, their bodies broken, their glowing skin dulled. You did this, a voice hissed behind him. He whirled around to find Altria herself, bloodied and furious. Her armor was shattered, and her eyes burned with hate. You brought this destruction, human. Your crash poisoned our jungle. Your science cursed our people. Elden stumbled back, horror rising in his chest. No, I didn't. This isn't... You think yourself clever, she snarled, advancing on him. But your arrogance will destroy everything it touches. The vines around him twisted, morphing into skeletal hands that clawed at his legs, pulling him down. The Queen raised a jagged spear, her voice a roar. You don't belong here, Elden Halil. You will pay for your crimes. The spear came down, but instead of impaling him, it shattered into light. The illusion warped and faltered, and Elden gritted his teeth. You can throw all the guilt you want at me, he said, pushing himself to his feet. But I don't let my fears define me. The nightmare dissolved, leaving him standing once more in the pit of writhing vines. The light around him pulsed rhythmically, as if the plant was growing agitated. The spores thickened, the air shimmering as a third vision began to form. This time, Elden stood in the jungle, but it was different. The bioluminescent plants glowed brighter, more vibrant, and the air felt lighter, almost intoxicating. A soft laugh drew his attention, and he turned to see Altria. But this wasn't the stern, imperious queen. She looked almost human. Her blue skin glowed faintly in the twilight, and her expression was softer, free of her usual mask of authority. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that could disarm even the most hardened skeptic. Welcome back, she said, her voice warm. You've proven yourself, Elden. He frowned. What is this? She stepped closer, her movements graceful, deliberate. You've earned your place here. No more trials, no more cages. Stay with us. Stay with me. Elden's heart thudded in his chest. Her tone was mesmerizing, her presence overwhelming. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his cheek. The touch sent a shiver down his spine. You don't have to fight anymore, she murmured. Just stay. Imagine what we could accomplish together. Think of the discoveries, the understanding. For a moment, Elden hesitated. She was offering peace, partnership, something he'd always wanted. A connection that went beyond mere survival. But something felt wrong. He took a step back, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. You're not her. Altria's expression darkened, her form flickering. The soft glow around her became harsh, almost menacing. Why do you resist? What more do you want? Elden's voice hardened. The truth. Not illusions. Not lies. The vision shattered, and Elden found himself back in the pit. The vines writhed violently, as if angered by his defiance. The glowing tendrils dimmed, their patterns faltering. The crowd above erupted into murmurs as Elden climbed out of the pit, breathing heavily, but unbroken. His body ached, his mind reeled, but he had won. Queen Altria stood on the edge of the platform, her expression carefully neutral, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something. Admiration? Curiosity? You survived the JLR spiral, she said, her voice low. Few do. Even fewer emerge unchanged. Elden smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. I'd say I'm exactly the same. handsome, brilliant, and annoyingly persistent. Altria stepped closer, her gaze intense. You resisted its illusions. Even the strongest of my warriors have faltered. How? Elden met her eyes, his voice steady. Because I know who I am, and I don't let anyone, or anything, tell me otherwise. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Then, Altria turned to the crowd. Today, the Earthling has proven his strength of will. Tomorrow we test his heart. Elden's grin widened. You might want to make tomorrow's trial a bit tougher. I'm on a winning streak. Altria's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile, before she spun and strode away. The crowd cheered, their respect for the strange human growing. As Elden was led back to his cage, he couldn't help but think, whatever tomorrow brings, this is just getting interesting. Elden awoke to the sound of drums echoing through the canopy. The jungle was alive with activity, warriors preparing weapons, elders painting their skin with glowing patterns, and children running errands with an energy that reminded him of Earth festivals. From his cage, the scene below looked almost festive, as if today's trial was as much a celebration as a test. The guards arrived shortly after sunrise, their expressions unreadable. Elden stretched, rubbing his neck as he stepped out of the cage. "Morning, ladies," he said with a wry grin. "I assume today's trial involves something more challenging than alien illusions?" The guards didn't answer, merely gesturing for him to follow. As they led him toward the central platform, Elden's thoughts turned to Queen Altria. The way she'd looked at him yesterday, curious, calculating, made him wonder if this was more than just a trial to prove his worth. Was she testing him, or testing herself? The central platform was different today. Instead of the open space he'd seen yesterday, it was adorned with bioluminescent flowers and cascading vines, creating an almost ceremonial atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of alien blooms, sweet and heady. The crowd gathered in silence, their faces painted with glowing symbols that pulsed softly in the jungle's dim light. Queen Altria stood at the center, resplendent in her ceremonial armor. Her white hair flowed freely, adorned with small, iridescent ornaments that shimmered as she moved. Her expression was as inscrutable as ever, but her eyes locked onto Elden as he approached. "The test of heart is not one of combat or wit," she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. "It is a test of understanding, of connection. A warrior's strength means nothing without the will to protect, without the ability to see beyond themselves." Elden raised an eyebrow. "Sounds philosophical. Do I get a jungle textbook? Or is this more of a pop quiz?" Altria ignored his comment, gesturing toward the platform's edge. Two warriors stepped forward, carrying a struggling creature. It was unlike anything Elden had seen, a mix of feline grace and reptilian scales, with glowing amber eyes that glared at its captors. Despite its obvious captivity, it radiated raw, untamed power. "This is a HFY, a guardian of our jungle," Altria said. "It is wounded, confused, and dangerous. Your task is simple. Calm it. Prove that your heart can reach what your mind cannot." Elden stared at the creature, which hissed and thrashed against its bonds. "Calm it? That's your test? What happens if it decides to use me as a chew toy?" "Then you fail," Altria said with a faint smirk. "And the jungle claims you." The warriors released the HFY, and it landed on the platform with a low growl. The crowd stepped back as the creature's amber eyes locked onto Elden. Its body coiled like a spring, muscles rippling beneath its scaled fur. Elden felt his pulse quicken. "No pressure," he muttered. Elden took a cautious step forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The HFY snarled, its sharp claws scraping the wooden platform. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Easy there, big guy," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The creature's ears twitched, but it didn't relax. Instead, it crouched lower, preparing to pounce. Elden racked his brain. What did he know about alien predators? Not much. But back on Earth, animals responded to energy. Fear made them aggressive. Calm made them curious. He crouched low, trying to make himself smaller, less threatening. You're scared, aren't you? He murmured. Wounded. I get it. Believe me, I've been there. The HFY hesitated, its growl faltering. Its glowing eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to Elden. It seemed to understand he was speaking, even if the words didn't register. Encouraged, he took another step closer. You're beautiful, you know that? He said, his voice steady. Strong. Fast. I bet nothing in this jungle can touch you when you're at your best. The creature tilted its head, the tension in its body easing slightly. Elden kept talking, his voice low and soothing. But even the strongest need help sometimes. Even guardians. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly. The HFY sniffed the air, its amber eyes narrowing. For a long moment, Elden thought it would lunge. But then, it took a tentative step forward, its snarl fading into a soft, questioning growl. That's it, Elden whispered. We're not so different. You and I lost, a little scared, but still fighting. The HFY sniffed his hand, then nudged it gently with its scaled muzzle. Elden exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He ran his hand over the creature's head, feeling the rough texture of its scales mixed with the softness of its fur. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Elden barely noticed. He was too focused on the HFY, which had lowered itself to the platform, its body relaxing completely. Queen Altria stepped forward, her expression unreadable. The HFY rose and turned to her, dipping its head in a gesture that seemed almost reverent before leaping off the platform and disappearing into the jungle. You surprised me, Earthling, Altria said, her voice low. Few have the courage to face the HFY. Fewer still the ability to reach it. Elden straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. Guess I've got a knack for connecting with stubborn creatures. Her lips twitched, but she didn't smile. Instead, she gestured for the crowd to quiet. Today, this human has passed the test of heart. He has shown courage, understanding, and a willingness to connect beyond himself. The crowd cheered again, but Altria's gaze remained fixed on Elden. Tomorrow, the final trial awaits. It will test everything you are and everything you claim to be. Rest well, Earthling. You'll need it. Elden met her eyes, his smirk returning. Looking forward to it, Your Majesty. You've been keeping me on my toes. Altria turned, her white hair catching the jungle light as she walked away. Elden watched her go, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and unease. He had passed 2 trials, but something told him the final challenge would be unlike anything he'd faced before. As the guards led him back to his cage, he couldn't help but wonder, was the queen testing him, or herself? And what would happen when the trials were over?